Coming up in today's video, is Sony ever going to release the true successor to the A7S II? And how on earth are they going to exceed our expectations now that Canon's bringing out the R5? Hi, I'm Andy and this is Camera Cravings. If you're new here, subscribe and click the bell for notifications of new videos as and when they come out. And all the links to everything I talk about in the video and gear I use will be down in the description below if you want to check those out. Before we get into the main video today, I'm going to be doing a lens giveaway. So I've just hit 500 subscribers, and to celebrate that, I wanted to give away something to give back to the YouTube community. And I've got this Batis 18mm Zeiss lens, which is a 2.8, and I've had for probably about 8 months, and I've only used it a couple of times because it was bought for a project and I don't really need it anymore because I actually purchased the Tamron 17-28. So I thought, what a better way than, rather than sell it, I would give it to one of you guys. So all you need to do to win this lens is subscribe to the channel if you're not already, and second, comment down below on this video with at least one feature that you would love to see in the Sony A7S III or whatever they end up calling it. And then I will pick a winner and announce that in one of my videos in 2 weeks' time roughly. So look out for that. It will be around the time that the Canon R5 and R6 are announced. So around the 8th and 9th of July sometime. And yeah, hope you're the lucky winner. So with that out of the way, let's get on to the main video today. So the A7S III has been such a long time coming that it feels like it may never arrive, but thankfully Sony Alpha Rumours, Megapixel and other rumour sites have recently announced that they think it's going to be coming at the end of July, if not maybe a bit sooner, maybe mid-July, certainly after the Canon announcements, which are on the 9th of July. So as is typical with these kind of videos, I've literally just been editing this, trying to get it out, and I've just seen on DP Review that they've got an interview with Kenji Tenaka, who is the Vice President and General Manager of Sony's business unit for the Digital Imaging Group. So he's one of the head people there, and yeah, basically there's a load of stuff that's talked about this camera release, and what is good is most of this video that I've done is still relevant, and actually we haven't really got much new information other than to say that the A7S III, or whatever they will end up calling it, is definitely coming. And the big thing for me is that he said in the interview that everything is new. Now, whether that means it's a completely new body design and new user interface and all that kind of stuff, if it is, that's fantastic. As I talk about later in the video, I think that is something that's needed, but it's definitely going to have a brand new sensor that they haven't used in any of these cameras, so that's great. And yeah, it's worth looking at. I'll link up the article in the description of the video below. But I just wanted to say that just in case you're wondering whether I'd seen that or not. I'm going to put up on screen now the information and the kind of rumours that I think are credible about what we might expect from this camera. As I've said, it's going to be hopefully announced in July 2020 after the R5 and R6 announcements from Canon, and based on that date we're hoping it's going to be available to actually pre-order from the end of July and hopefully shipping by the end of August. The other thing that we've had confirmed over the last couple of years is Sony executives in interviews have confirmed that it should be a continuation of the product line. So it should be an A7S branded camera, we would think. It should have a price tag of around $3,000 or £3,500. The other thing that we know is that it's very likely to use one of two sensors. There's a new 15.36 megapixel back illuminated stacked sensor with a quad Bayer design, which was rumoured as being used in the camera last year, and it seems quite likely given what the A7sIII used, which was a 12 megapixel sensor. The other sensor that's come out recently and been announced was a 36 megapixel sensor, which also could feature in this camera, but it's probably less likely. It's likely that it will use a similar design to the A7R3 or A7R4, and it may implement some kind of cooling vent at the back, similar to the Panasonic S1H, depending on what kind of output it's giving in terms of like 4K or 6K. We're expecting it to be capable of oversampled 4K 60 frames a second, 10-bit and 422 internally. It may give us more than that, but that's kind of what you'd expect from this camera at the very least. And then it's also likely to have a very similar autofocus system to recently released cameras from Sony, like the A7R4 and the A9 II. And of course, we're expecting that it will be the same as the A7sIII in terms of being excellent in low light with clean high ISO video. So those are the things that we know so far, and we can be fairly confident about. The things that I want to move on to now are kind of what would exceed my expectations for this camera and actually make me want to stay with Sony rather than maybe switching systems to Canon. I don't really want to switch systems. It's going to be very expensive because I'd have to buy a whole load of new glass for Canon and sell all my Sony stuff, which realistically I'm not going to get a huge amount of money for. So I've listed here 8 things that I want to see or I'd like to see. So number 1 would be the sensor and video image quality. So I'd be thrilled to see 4K 60 from this camera and hopefully 4K either 100 frames a second or 120, maybe with a slight crop. To be honest, if it had a bit of a crop, that wouldn't bother me that much. The 15.3 megapixel sensor would only give a small megapixel boost compared to the 12 megapixel sensor from the A7sIII, and it would probably rule out this camera having 8K, but potentially it's going to have a completely different architecture to this sensor than the ones that have gone before, with 60 million photo sites in a quad Bayer arrangement. So in this respect, the sensor potentially represents a really big step up in resolution and color capture data from a standard Bayer array sensor that we've seen in the past. And due to that quad Bayer array, the images in 4K and the stills at 15 megapixels should look a lot crisper and sharper than those of a standard 15 megapixel sensor. The quad Bayer image in 4K would actually be oversampled from a 4.8K sensor readout, so should look closer to a 6K image in the final 3840 by 2160 file. As I said earlier, I'd also hope to see 10-bit 422 internally as well. Number 2 is IBIS, so that's in-body image stabilization. Now, I feel like Sony was kind of at the forefront of this a few years back when the A7sIII was released. They were definitely one of the front runners, and it feels like since then they've kind of gone backwards compared to the competition. So like Panasonic, Olympus, even Canon now and Fuji, they're all bringing cameras which have got better in-body stabilization than Sony's. So I would love to see some kind of big improvement from Sony. I'm not sure how they'll do it, but if they can do it, that would be brilliant so that you don't have to rely on using a gimbal. One way they might do that is by employing like a digital IBIS as well, and maybe a boost option like some of the other cameras have these days. And that might mean that you end up with a slight crop on your image, which isn't ideal, but if it gives you that option to get like more stable images with that slight crop penalty, I'd be quite happy with that. So we'll have to wait and see on that one. Number 3, I would love just to see a lot less rolling shutter. It's something that's plagued Sony bodies for a long time, and you know, you can see it every time you film with these cameras, and it would be great to see a Sony body which either just has really low rolling shutter or even a global shutter, which is something that has been rumoured, but I suspect they will probably implement a global shutter on a crop body sensor camera first rather than full frame, just because it's a lot easier for them to do that. The fourth thing that I'd love to see relates to stills. So within the 15 megapixel sensor specs, it does talk about a 61 megapixel readout mode at low frame rates of 15 frames a second or under. So essentially for stills mode in the camera. So Sony could market this camera as a 61 megapixel camera in keeping with their flagship A7R4, and potentially incorporate a mode where you could actually take still images at up to that resolution, which would be absolutely amazing. And it would avoid that kind of trade-off that you're getting between low light and resolution. So the fifth thing I'd love to see on this Sony camera is improved ergonomics, user interface, and a fully articulating screen. Sony is behind again in this kind of area compared to like Canon. Sony cameras also really need a user interface overhaul, and I'd love to see them implement something like Hasselblad has done with their kind of touch panel interface that just looks lovely to work with, because you can just select all of your settings, focus modes, everything from that touch panel, even when your eye is up to the viewfinder, and it just gives you so much more flexibility. And if Sony could do that, either as a non-articulating screen, but ideally with a fully articulating screen, that would be a huge feature that would sell this camera like hotcakes, I think. The other thing that I would love to see twinned with that touchscreen panel is something similar to what GoPro has done on their Hero 8 camera, and that is having kind of custom presets that you can dial in, and then on the home screen you literally have like a little button in the corner where you just tap it and you're into like a custom preset 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe have 4 or 5 presets that you could use, and that would give you the ability to just switch between like stills and video modes really quickly, or if you want to go into a high frame rate mode really quickly. It would just save messing around in all the menu systems and save so much time. I would love to see that. The next thing I wanted to talk about was the articulating screen. We've seen it on the ZV-1 or the ZV-1, and I really hope they bring that kind of technology to this camera. So next on my list is improved connectivity. So I'd love to see a better app and much better Wi-Fi with this camera, which would allow something similar to what Image Canon is doing, where you're sending files direct to the cloud from your location. So if you're out on a shoot, you can start sending them to the cloud, drive home, and by the time you get home, they'll be there ready to sync up with like your Adobe Lightroom or Photoshop or any other software that you're using, and it would just save so much time, and you'd also have a backup straight away, which would just be brilliant for workflow. So another thing that has plagued Sony bodies for a long time now is the kind of delay that you have between recording video and stills and being able to preview those files on the camera. And I'd really love to see a kind of increase in processing power in this camera to allow you to just be able to seamlessly go from shooting to reviewing files without this kind of delay and without a limitation on even what you can do in the menu system while those files are writing to the cards. That would be a huge improvement. The other thing I'd really like to see, which I've started to see on DJI drones and also a couple of the 360 cameras that I own, have internal memory, and whether that's 64 gigabytes or for this camera, hopefully 128 as a minimum. Things like that would really help, because it would mean if you forget cards, or if you just need a bit of extra space, or if you don't want to have to write to cards, then you've got that internal memory. I'd love to see that as a feature on here, and if they're not going to implement that, I would love to see them implement 2 card slots, CF Express, or maybe if they can do UHS-2 SD card slots, which have the ability to take and utilize the new SD8 specification and the SD Express memory cards that will be coming soon, which offer up to, I think it's 4 gigabytes a second transfer rates, some of them. So if they can future-proof this camera at least so that it will be able to take that maybe with a firmware update. That would be brilliant. The last thing on my list is just improved weather sealing. They have been getting better with this over time, and the latest camera bodies they've brought out have been much better weather sealed than the original generation of cameras, but I think they can still get better, and that's something I would like to see because I use these cameras out in the field a lot. So let me know if you agree with things I've said in this video. Is there anything that you'd love to see in this camera that I haven't mentioned? Pop it in the comments down below. I'd be really interested to hear people's thoughts. And yeah, please do sub, like the video if you've enjoyed it, and click that bell for notifications of videos coming up. I will be announcing the winner of this lens giveaway in 2 weeks' time, so make sure you look out for that video, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.